Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Universe Night. Tonight, we journey back in time, stepping into the quiet, dimly lit tents of the 19th century. We are exploring the medical world of the American Civil War, specifically the astonishing reality of surgery before the widespread use of anesthesia. You will encounter the sheer physical reality of the human body, the raw mechanics of survival, and the incredible resilience of bone, muscle, and mind. We will explore the physics of the projectiles that shattered the piece, the intricate, rapid movements of the surgeon's hands, and the invisible biological forces that knit flesh back together in an era before we understood the microscopic world. It is a story not just of conflict, but of the profound, quiet will of the human organism to endure and heal. Before we step into that historical night, I invite you to settle into your own space. Allow your shoulders to soften into the mattress. Let your breathing slow its pace, finding a steady, comforting rhythm. Release your grip on the day that has just passed. The work is done, the world is quiet, and there is nowhere else you need to be. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. Let's begin. The mid-19th century was an era suspended between ancient remedies and modern science. In the early 1860s, the medical profession was on the precipice of a massive transformation, though the doctors of the time could not yet see it. A physician's training was largely observational, relying on textbooks that described the body in broad, almost philosophical terms. There were no antibiotics, no X-rays, and no true understanding of bacterial infection. When a surgeon looked at a patient, they relied entirely on their own senses, the texture of the skin, the rhythm of the pulse, the temperature of a limb. They were engineers of the macro world, working with tissue and bone much like a carpenter works with wood. Imagine trying to repair a complex, running machine in near darkness, armed only with a basic understanding of its largest gears. They operated with profound dedication, using the tools and knowledge available to them in a time before the microscope illuminated the hidden causes of disease. It is a reminder that science is a slow, unfolding dawn, and every generation operates in the twilight of what it does not yet know. Anesthesia existed, but it was not the universal shield against pain we know today. While ether and chloroform had been discovered and used in the decades prior to the war, their application in the chaotic environment of a field hospital was often inconsistent or entirely absent. In many remote camps, supply lines were severed, leaving surgical tents without these precious chemical vapors. When available, they were administered by dropping the liquid onto a cloth held over the face, a highly imprecise method that required careful observation of the patient's breathing. But in thousands of cases, operations were performed with nothing to dull the sensation. The human body had to face the sharp edge of the scalpel with its senses fully awake. To understand this is to recognize the sheer capacity of the nervous system to process extreme stimuli. The brain, receiving a flood of urgent signals from the site of the injury, had to navigate a sensory storm without the artificial silence of modern anesthetics. This is not simply a historical fact. It is a testament to the raw, unedited endurance of human biology when stripped of modern comforts. The body possesses its own internal mechanism to survive catastrophic pain. When the physical trauma became too immense for the conscious mind to bear, the biology of the patient would often initiate a state of physiological shock. This is the body's natural override system, a deeply ingrained survival tactic designed to protect the core functions of life. Blood flow is redirected away from the extremities and concentrated around the vital organs, the heart, the lungs, the brain. The nervous system, overwhelmed by the intensity of the signals it is receiving, sometimes dampens the perception of agony, creating a strange, dreamlike detachment. Soldiers on the operating table often reported feeling the mechanical pressure of the instruments, the pulling and the cutting, without the sharp, piercing agony one would expect. The brain floods the system with endorphins, the body's own natural opiates, trying to dull the roaring fire of the injury. It is as if the body, realizing the mind is trapped in a terrifying reality, builds a temporary, quiet room for consciousness to hide inside. Even in our most vulnerable moments, the architecture of our biology is fiercely protective. A field hospital was an ecosystem dictated by the elements. These spaces of healing were rarely permanent structures. They were hastily erected canvas tents, reperp, oast barns, or the shaded areas beneath large oak trees. The surgeons and their patients were entirely at the mercy of the weather. Dust from moving cavalry would coat the surgical tables, and the heat of a summer afternoon would turn a tent into a suffocating oven. The light they used was often the natural sun filtering through canvas, or the flickering, uncertain glow of candles and oil lanterns as day turned to night. The environment was not a sterile, controlled room, but a porous extension of the battlefield itself. Wind carried the sounds of distant artillery, and the earth beneath them absorbed the remnants of their work. Healing in this context was not separated from nature. It was an intricate dance with the surrounding world, where survival depended as much on the fresh air blowing through the open flaps as it did on the surgeon's blade. A planet does not pause its seasons, even when humanity is at war. The human skeleton provided the ultimate structural challenge for the 19th-century surgeon. Bones are not simple, solid columns of calcium. They are living, dynamic tissues composed of a dense outer shell called cortical bone and a spongy, honeycomb-like interior known as cancellous bone. When shattered by the heavy lead projectiles of the era, the bone did not simply break. It splintered into sharp, dangerous fragments that embedded themselves deep within the surrounding muscle. The surgeon's primary task was to navigate this complex wreckage. They had to understand the architecture of the limb, tracing the long lines of the femur, or the delicate parallel structures of the tibia and fibula. Removing a shattered limb was an act of architectural deconstruction, requiring an intimate knowledge of where the load-bearing pillars of the body connected to the intricate web of tendons and ligaments. They were quite literally dismantling the house of the body to save the foundation. The skeleton, usually hidden beneath the softness of flesh, became the stark, uncompromising landscape upon which the battle for a patient's life was fought. A physician's education in the 1860s was a matter of rapid theoretical study. To become a doctor in the mid-19th century, a student typically attended a medical college for only 2 consecutive winter terms, often listening to the exact same lectures both years. There were no mandatory residency programs, no rigorous clinical rotations, and no standardized testing to ensure hands-on competence. A young man could graduate and be handed a surgical saw without ever having touched a living patient or performed a procedure under the guidance of a senior surgeon. The science of human anatomy was learned primarily from textbooks and the occasional observation of a dissection in a crowded, poorly ventilated amphitheater. They memorized the names of bones, the pathways of major arteries, and the origins of muscles as if studying the geography of a distant, unseen continent. It was an era where medical authority was built on confident memorization rather than practical experience. This system produced men of deep dedication but limited physical practice, sending them out to repair the devastating mechanics of human trauma. It is a striking realization that the hands holding the scalpel were often learning their craft in the very moment they were trying to save a life. The air itself was viewed as the primary carrier of disease and infection. Before the germ theory was proven and widely accepted, the medical establishment believed in the concept of miasma. This theory held that illnesses were caused by foul, corrupted air emanating from decaying organic matter, stagnant swamps, and unwashed bodies. When surgeons walked through a crowded, poorly drained camp and smelled the heavy, sour odor of illness, they believed the smell itself was the vector of sickness. They did not know about the microscopic bacteria thriving in the soil, the water, or on their own unwashed instruments. Because they blamed the invisible currents of the wind, their preventative measures focused heavily on ventilation, ensuring that hospital tents had open flaps to allow the bad air to escape. While fresh air did improve conditions, it left the true, microscopic culprits free to multiply on the surgical tables and in the wounds of the soldiers. They were fighting a ghost in the atmosphere, while the real enemy lived quietly on their fingertips. Sometimes, humanity looks up at the sky for answers that are hiding in the dust at its feet. The assembly of massive armies triggered a silent, microscopic collision of isolated populations. When hundreds of thousands of young men left their remote, rural farms to join the ranks, they brought with them immune systems that had never encountered the diseases common to dense cities. The sudden gathering of these men created a perfect, fertile ground for viral and bacterial pathogens to sweep through the regiments like an invisible fire. before a S. Ingalls shot was fired in major battles. Camps were decimated by outbreaks of childhood diseases such as measles, mumps, and rubella, alongside devastating waves of dysentery and typhoid fever. The biology of a young farmer, adapted to the isolated flora of a distant valley, was violently introduced to the collective biological burden of a nation. The medical corps found themselves overwhelmed not just by artillery wounds, but by the sheer epidemiological weight of human crowding. The human immune system, trained only for the familiar, was suddenly forced to learn the chemical signatures of 1,000 strangers. A camp of soldiers is not just a military formation. It is an abrupt, dangerous merging of 1,000 different biological histories. The basic chemical compounds of healing were carried in fragile glass bottles across unforgiving terrain. The logistical reality of supplying a moving army with medical necessities was a fragile and chaotic endeavor. Medical purveyors packed heavy wooden wagons with delicate glass vials of quinine, blue mass, whiskey, and opium, the fundamental pharmacopoeia of the era. These wagons, pulled by horses and mules, bounced over deeply rutted dirt roads, through muddy fields, and across rocky riverbeds. The friction and the impact frequently shattered the bottles, leaving the precious, life-saving liquids to soak uselessly into the wooden floorboards of the carriages. The science of chemical preservation was rudimentary, meaning that even when the medicines survived the physical journey, they often degraded in the extreme heat of the summer or froze solid in the winter campaigns. A surgeon's ability to treat a patient was often dictated by the simple physics of a wagon wheel striking a stone miles away. The delivery of relief was held hostage by the primitive mechanics of 19th-century transportation. The line between pain and comfort was often as thin as a single pane of hand-blown glass. The ancient belief in balancing bodily fluids still shadowed the medical practices of the day. Though the field was slowly modernizing, many doctors still adhered to the remnants of humoral theory, a concept dating back to ancient Greece that believed human health depended on the balance of 4 vital fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When a patient presented with a high fever or severe inflammation, the medical instinct was to aggressively purge the body to restore this imagined equilibrium. This resulted in the widespread use of powerful laxatives, chemical emetics to induce vomiting, and heavy metal compounds like calomel, which contained toxic mercury. In their earnest attempt to drive the sickness out of the body, they often severely dehydrated and weakened patients who were already fighting for their lives. The science of the time confused the violent reaction of the body to a toxin with the process of healing itself. They viewed the human organism as a vessel that needed to be forcibly emptied of its corruption, rather than a complex system that needed support and hydration. It is a quiet tragedy of early science that the cure often demanded as much endurance as the disease. To understand the hidden structures of tissue, surgeons relied on intricately illustrated anatomical atlases. In the absence of X-rays or medical imaging, The inner workings of the human body were mapped through the meticulous artistry of medical illustrators. Surgeons carried large, heavy books filled with lithographs and engravings that detailed the precise layering of skin, fascia, muscle, and bone. These images were often beautifully colored by hand, using bright red ink to trace the path of the femoral artery and deep blue to map the venous return. Before an unfamiliar amputation, a surgeon might consult these pages by the light of a single candle, tracing his finger over the paper representation of the limb he was about to alter forever. The science of anatomy was preserved and transmitted through the precise cross-hatching of an artist's pen. These books were more than just reference manuals. They were geographical maps of a dark, internal world, offering a two-dimensional guide to a three-dimensional crisis. The beauty of the drawn lines stood in stark contrast to the chaotic reality of the operating tent. Even in the midst of destruction, humanity relies on art to find its way through the dark. The sudden shift from civilian practice to battlefield medicine required a profound psychological adaptation. The doctors who marched with the regiments were largely local practitioners accustomed to treating seasonal fevers, assisting in childbirth, and setting the occasional broken bone from a farming accident. The mathematics of their daily practice were small, quiet, and manageable. The war forced them into an industrial scale of trauma for which nothing could have prepared them. They had to transition from the slow, deliberate care of a single neighbor in a quiet bedroom to managing a caunt, insidious, overwhelming tide of catastrophic, high-velocity injuries in an open field. The psychological science of this adaptation is staggering. The human brain must rapidly recalibrate its threshold for horror and its definition of success. A surgeon had to learn to look past the overwhelming visual shock of a shattered limb and immediately focus on the cold, mechanical steps of hemostasis and bone removal. They had to compartmentalize their empathy to preserve their utility. This transformation from a healer of ailments to an architect of survival is a testament to the mind's ability to adapt. To save a life, one must sometimes learn to briefly ignore the person living it. The invention of the Minié ball fundamentally changed the geometry and speed of warfare. Before this era, soldiers fired spherical lead musket balls that tumbled unpredictably through the air, losing velocity and accuracy over relatively short distances. The new projectile was not a ball at all, but a conical cylinder with a hollow base and grooves carved into its sides. When the gunpowder ignited inside the rifle, the intense heat and pressure caused the hollow base of the lead to expand, gripping the spiraled rifling inside the barrel of the gun. This forced the bullet to spin rapidly as it exited the muzzle, much like a perfectly thrown spiral in a game of catch. This gyroscopic stabilization allowed it to cut through the air with devastating aerodynamic efficiency, traveling faster, farther, and with terrifying, sustained accuracy. The science of ballistics had taken a massive leap forward, applying the laws of physics to ensure the projectile reached its target with maximum kinetic force. A simple change in geometric shape transformed a piece of lead into a guided vessel of destruction. It is a quiet reminder that a slight shift in physical design can alter the trajectory of human history. The sheer destructive power of the projectile lay in its elemental softness. Unlike modern military bullets that are encased in a hard copper jacket to preserve their shape upon impact, the Minié ball was cast from pure, unalloyed lead. Lead is a remarkably dense but malleable metal, heavy in the hand and easy to mold. When this soft, heavy cone struck human tissue at over 900 feet per second, it did not pass cleanly through the body like a needle. Instead, the sudden resistance of skin, muscle, and bone caused the lead to instantly flatten, expand, and deform. It mushroomed outwards, transforming from a narrow, aerodynamic cone into a jagged, flattened disc of tearing metal. This physical transformation meant that a bullet entering through a hole the size of a fingertip could exit through a wound the size of a man's fist. The metal surrendered its shape to the dense architecture of the body, maximizing the transfer of its destructive force into the surrounding flesh. The element designed to fly beautifully through the air became a chaotic, formless mass the moment it met resistance. It illustrates the violent paradox of a material yielding to the very thing it destroys. The physics of a gunshot wound is a study in the sudden transfer of massive kinetic energy. When the heavy lead projectile entered a limb, its high velocity was rapidly absorbed by the surrounding soft tissues. Water makes up a vast majority of human flesh, and water cannot be compressed. As the bullet plowed forward, the energy it displaced radiated outward in a violent, high-speed shockwave, creating what ballistics experts call a temporary cavity. For a fraction of a millisecond, the internal tissue was thrown violently away from the bullet's path, stretching muscles, tearing microscopic blood vessels, and ripping delicate nerve fibers far beyond the actual physical track of the lead itself. The visible hole on the skin was only a small fraction of the invisible, internal devastation caused by this hydrostatic shock. Surgeons of the 19th century could only see the torn flesh on the surface. They could not witness the microscopic, explosive forces that had rippled through the patient's cells like a heavy stone dropped into a quiet pond. The true injury was not just the metal, but the invisible wave of force it carried. Energy, once unleashed, must always find a place to go. A collision between soft lead and human bone created a secondary storm of projectiles. When the heavy, expanding Minié ball struck the dense cortical shell of a femur or a humerus, the bone did not merely fracture or snap as it might from a heavy fall. The sheer kinetic impact caused the bone to literally explode from the inside. The human skeleton, rigid and unyielding, shattered into dozens of sharp, jagged splinters. These bone fragments were instantly propelled outward by the force of the strike, becoming internal shrapnel that tore through the surrounding muscles and severed delicate arteries from the inside out. The surgeon was left facing a limb that felt like a sack of loose gravel, The structural integrity of the body entirely erased in a microsecond. The scaffolding of life had been weaponized against the soft flesh. It was meant to support and protect. To save the patient, the doctor had to recognize that the bone was no longer a foundation, but a collection of dangerous debris. Even the strongest pillars of our bodies can become fragile when struck by the indifferent laws of physics. The projectile acted as a brutal courier, dragging the outside world deep into the sterile environment of the body. Because the heavy lead bullet expanded and tumbled as it struck, it rarely entered the body cleanly. It punched through the heavy wool of a soldier's uniform, grabbing twisted fibers, dirt, sweat, and unwashed skin, pulling them directly into the dark, oxygen-deprived depths of the wound track. In an era before anyone knew that microscopic bacteria caused infection, this introduction of foreign material was a guaranteed death sentence for the limb. The deep muscle tissue, normally protected by the brilliant, unbroken barrier of the skin, was suddenly seeded with debris heavily laden with pathogens. The wound became a perfect, warm incubator for microscopic life. Surgeons would then probe the injury with their own unwashed fingers or unsterilized metal instruments, unknowingly adding their own microscopic burden to the biological crisis. They could pull out the visible pieces of wool with their forceps, but the invisible seeds of decay remained firmly planted in the tissue. The integrity of the body is maintained by its boundaries, and once breached, the microscopic world rushes in to reclaim what it can. The sheer mechanical devastation left amputation as the only logical architectural solution. Given the shattered, pulverized state of the bone and the massive loss of surrounding muscle and vascular tissue, there was simply nothing left for a surgeon to reconstruct. They had no titanium plates, no surgical screws, no synthetic bone grafts, and no way to manage the inevitable, deadly infections that would brew in a shattered limb. Attempting to save a leg that had taken a direct hit from a Minié ball was not an act of mercy. It was a slow, agonizing guarantee of systemic infection and death. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. The ruined limb had to be entirely separated from the healthy body to stop the spread of necrosis and gangrene. The surgeon's heavy saw was not an instrument of punishment or cruelty, but a crude, necessary firewall designed to save the core of the organism. By sacrificing a part, they preserved the whole, trading a limb for the continuation of a heartbeat. It is a profound and unsettling truth that healing sometimes requires the deliberate, permanent removal of what can no longer be saved. The surgeon's instruments were marvels of simple, gleaming metallurgy. A field surgeon's toolkit was not a sprawling array of electronics and synthetic plastics, but a compact, meticulously crafted set of steel and brass. These kits were often housed in beautiful, velvet-lined wooden boxes, usually made of mahogany or rosewood, complete with brass hinges and a locking clasp. Inside, the instruments were arranged with exact precision, nestled into custom-cut grooves like fine silverware. The metal was primarily high-carbon steel, chosen because it could hold an incredibly sharp edge, paired with handles made of ebony wood, polished bone, or cross-hatched brass to ensure a firm grip when covered in slippery fluids. The visual aesthetic of these kits was undeniably elegant, a stark contrast to the brutal reality of their intended use. A surgeon maintained his tools with the quiet devotion of a craftsman, regularly oiling the hinges and sharpening the blades on a leather strop until they could slice cleanly through a suspended piece of paper. The mechanics of saving a life relied heavily on the ancient, reliable science of metallurgy. There is a strange, quiet dignity in tools built to perform difficult work flawlessly. The capital saw was the heavy, undeniable centerpiece of the surgical box. When a limb was beyond repair, the surgeon reached for the amputation saw, often referred to as a capital saw. This instrument looked remarkably like a modern carpenter's tenon saw or a heavy hacksaw, featuring a thick, rigid spine of steel or brass running along the top of a wide, straight blade. The teeth were deeply cut, sharply angled, and designed specifically to bite cleanly through the dense, living material of human bone without slipping or snagging in the wet marrow. The handle was large and ergonomically curved, designed to fit deeply into the palm and allow the surgeon to apply significant downward pressure and leverage. The physics of the saw required steady, even, and powerful strokes, relying on the friction of the steel teeth to sever the rigid calcium structure of the femur or humerus. It was an instrument that required immense physical strength and precise control to see correctly, entirely devoid of any mechanical assistance. The stark, heavy geometry of the saw reflected the uncompromising nature of the task it performed. It is a heavy thing to hold the tool that will permanently alter the shape of a life. The scalpel was an instrument of immediate, precise geography. While the saw dealt with bone, the scalpel was the primary tool for navigating the softer, more complex landscapes of skin, fat, and muscle. The blades were small, thin, and honed to a terrifying microscopic sharpness, often forged with a slight curve to allow for smooth, sweeping incisions. In the hands of a skilled surgeon, a scalpel did not hack or tear. It parted tissue with the fluid grace of a ship cutting through calm water. The science of the incision required a deep understanding of human anatomy, knowing exactly how much pressure to apply to cut through the dermis without blindly severing the critical arteries hidden just millimeters below. Surgeons practiced the angle of their blades, knowing that a clean, sharp cut would heal far better than a jagged, hesitant one. The scalpel was an extension of the doctor's intent, translating their anatomical knowledge into a physical, visible line drawn across the body. It is a profound responsibility to draw the map of a patient's survival with such a sharp, quiet pen. The tourniquet was a simple application of immense mechanical pressure. Before a single incision could be made, the surgeon had to ensure the patient would not bleed to death from the major arteries that fed the limbs. They relied on a heavy brass and canvas device known as a petit tourniquet. This mechanism consisted of a strong woven strap that encircled the upper thigh or arm, attached to a thick brass screw mechanism. The surgeon would place a small wooden or leather pad directly over the main artery, and then twist the brass screw, drawing the canvas strap tighter and tighter. This applied focused, crushing mechanical force against the skin, compressing the soft tissue until the artery was physically pinned shut against the dense bone beneath it. The science of the tourniquet is the simple physics of pressure overcoming fluid dynamics. It acts as a heavy dam placed across a roaring river of blood. When applied correctly, the flow was completely arrested, turning the lower limb pale and cold, buying the surgeon the critical, bloodless minutes needed to work. A life often hung on the tensile strength of a canvas strap and the turning of a single brass screw. The tenaculum was a delicate tool for catching the invisible threads of life. Once the limb was removed, the immediate critical task was to find and secure the severed blood vessels before the tourniquet was loosened. The surgeon used a small, terrifyingly sharp instrument called a tenaculum, which resembled a tiny, curved steel hook or a sharp, single-pronged fork. Because severed arteries have a natural tendency to rapidly retract, pulling back like a snapped rubber band and hiding deep within the muscle tissue, the surgeon had to probe the open wound to find them. The sharp point of the tenaculum was designed to pierce the thick, muscular wall of the slippery, retreating artery and physically hook it, allowing the surgeon to pull the vessel slightly outward from the surrounding flesh. It was a tool of tiny, desperate precision, requiring a sharp eye to distinguish the white wall of an artery from the surrounding nerves and muscle fibers. The science of securing the vessel relied on the mechanical grip of this tiny steel hook. It is a moment of profound focus, searching a chaotic landscape to grasp the small, silent rivers that sustain us. The entire kit was cleaned with a profound, yet dangerous, misunderstanding. After an exhausting day at the operating table, a surgeon would carefully clean his velvet-lined box of instruments. He would wipe the blood from the steel blades, perhaps rinse the bone saw in a bucket of cold water, and carefully polish the brass handles with a dry cloth. They maintained the visual cleanliness of their tools with great pride, ensuring no rust gathered on the fine steel edges. However, they were entirely ignorant of the invisible, microscopic world of bacteria that clung to the microscopic scratches on the metal. A scalpel might be wiped clean on an unwashed apron and placed back in the velvet groove, carrying unseen pathogens from one patient directly to the bloodstream of the next. The science of sterilization, boiling instruments, or using chemical antiseptics like carbolic acid was still years away from common practice. They cared deeply for their tools, ensuring their physical perfection while unknowingly preserving their biological danger. It is a tragic irony that the instruments of salvation were also the invisible carriers of the very infections they feared most. Speed was the only true defense against the overwhelming tide of pain. In the absence of reliable chemical anesthesia, minimizing the duration of surgical trauma was the only viable way to prevent fatal neurogenic shock. The human nervous system can endure catastrophic surges of pain signals, but only for a very narrow window before systemic collapse occurs and the heart falters. Because surgeons could not silence the pain, their only option was to outrun it. They trained themselves to operate with a rapid, almost aggressive efficiency, stripping away any hesitant or unnecessary motions. Every second the body spent under the knife was a fraction of its vital reserve draining away into the surrounding air. The surgeon's hands moved like the intricate, frictionless gears of a fine pocket watch, performing complex anatomical separations with a speed that bordered on the impossible. Time, rather than medicine, became the great merciful blanket under which the patient survived. It is a striking realization that in the darkest moments of medical history, the ticking hand of the clock was the most effective painkiller available. An entire limb could be separated from the body in less than 3 minutes. The mechanics of 19th-century amputation were streamlined for pure, unadulterated velocity. A skilled field surgeon did not measure his work in hours, but in heartbeats and frantic seconds. With a few swift, sweeping cuts of a large scalpel, the skin and deep muscle layers were divided. The heavy bone saw was then applied, requiring perhaps a dozen powerful, rapid strokes to sever the femur entirely. Observers of these procedures often described them as a sudden blur of flashing steel and falling flesh, the movement so rapid that the eye could scarcely track the transition from a whole leg to a severed one. The physical energy expended by the doctor in those 3 minutes was immense, an explosive burst of focused biomechanical force directed into the unyielding tissue of the patient. It is astonishing to consider how quickly the dense, complex architecture of a human lifetime can be permanently dismantled. The hands of the surgeon relied entirely on the silent science of muscle memory. To achieve such breathtaking speed, a surgeon could not pause to consciously think about the geography of the body. Through sheer repetition, the neural pathways governing their hand movements became heavily myelinated, a biological process that insulates nerve fibers and allows electrical signals to travel from the brain to the fingers at maximum velocity. They did not need to consciously search for the angle of the blade. The muscles simply knew the terrain. Like a seasoned musician navigating the strings of a cello in a pitch-black room, the surgeon's fingers found the delicate arteries by touch, guided purely by the familiar resistance of human tissue against the edge of the steel. The brain offloaded the complex geometry of the operation onto the deep, automatic systems of the motor cortex. The body of the healer learns the physical shape of trauma, memorizing the frantic steps of salvation, so the conscious mind does not have to. For the patient on the table, the perception of time stretched into an unrecognizable expanse. While the surgeon violently raced against the clock, the soldier experienced the passing of those 3 minutes in a profoundly altered state of consciousness. During moments of extreme pain and the massive release of adrenaline, the brain's amygdala shifts into overdrive, encoding memories with far greater density and detail than during normal experience. This neurological phenomenon causes the subjective experience of time to dilate, making a handful of seconds feel like agonizing, unending hours. The frantic, rapid movements of the surgical team appeared to the patient as a slow-motion dream, every scrape of the heavy saw echoing endlessly in the cavern of the mind. The physical reality of the tent was moving at maximum speed, but the internal reality of the sufferer was trapped in thick, unmoving amber. It is a quiet tragedy that the clock on the wall and the clock in the mind rarely agree when survival is on the line. The rhythm of the surgery shifted abruptly from violent speed to delicate stillness. Once the limb was detached and fell away, the frantic race against time instantly evaporated. The tourniquet high on the limb held the roaring pressure of the blood at bay, and the surgeon had to radically shift his mental and physical tempo. He now had to adopt a slow, meticulous, and intensely focused pace to find and tie off the severed arteries. Rushing this delicate phase would mean missed vessels, leading to fatal hemorrhage the moment the brass screw of the tourniquet was loosened. The storm of the heavy saw was instantly replaced by the quiet, searching probe of the tenaculum and the delicate tying of silk threads. The surgeon had to instantly slow his own racing heart, forcing his trembling hands to become perfectly still in the bloody landscape of the stump. Healing often requires us to know exactly when to run with all our might and exactly when to stand perfectly still. The surgeon existed within a narrow, highly focused tunnel of attention. To maintain such rapid physical speed in the midst of chaotic screaming, booming cannon fire, and the suffocating heat of the medical tent, the brain initiates a state of extreme selective attention, sometimes known as inattentional deafness. The surgeon's central nervous system actively filtered out the horrors of the surrounding hospital, dampening the sounds of other dying men and the smell of gunpowder. This allowed him to see nothing but the square foot of torn flesh immediately in front of his eyes. The world narrowed down to a tiny spotlight of blood and bone, a silent, invisible dome dropping over the operating table to block out the crushing reality of the war outside. If they allowed the peripheral chaos to enter their consciousness, the speed and precision of their hands would instantly shatter. The human mind has an extraordinary capacity to build heavy walls against the dark, so that the hands can safely do the work of the light. The conclusion of the rapid procedure brought a sudden, heavy wave of physiological exhaustion. Operating at this frantic, adrenaline-fueled speed required massive, unsustainable surges of stress hormones in the surgeon's own bloodstream. When the final artery was tied off, the flap of skin folded over, and the stump tightly bandaged, the sudden drop in cortisol and adrenaline caused an acute physical crash. The surgeon, who had just moved with the grace and power of a machine, would often find his hands trembling violently, his knees weak, and his breathing shallow. the tension released from their musculature like a heavily wound spring suddenly snapping, leaving the body hollow and heavy in the aftermath of the storm. They had to endure this biological crash, wipe their brows, turn to the next screaming soldier in the line, and force their nervous system to wind the spring all over again. Even the one who holds the knife must pay a steep physical toll to the demanding currents of time. The human body possesses an intricate, ancient override system designed to endure catastrophic injury. When the central nervous system is bombarded by a sudden, massive influx of pain signals, far beyond what the conscious brain can safely process in a single moment, it initiates a state of physiological shock. This is not a failure of the organism, but rather a drastic, highly coordinated defensive maneuver. The brain forcefully commands the vascular system to constrict the blood vessels in the extremities, pulling the vital flow of oxygen and nutrients away from the arms and legs. It redirects this precious fluid to the core, protecting the heart, the lungs, and the brain itself from sudden systemic collapse. Imagine a large, sprawling fortress under sudden siege. The defenders do not try to hold the outer walls. Instead, they immediately abandon the courtyards, pull back behind the heaviest iron gates, and concentrate all their remaining strength in the central keep. Even as the outer edges of the body surrender to the violence of the world, the quiet center fiercely gathers its strength to ensure the spark of life remains lit. A sudden surge of adrenaline can temporarily sever the mind's connection to physical agony. Epinephrine, commonly known as adrenaline, is a powerful hormone released by the adrenal glands directly into the bloodstream during moments of extreme trauma. This chemical acts as a profound, temporary anesthetic. It binds to receptors throughout the entire nervous system, accelerating the heart rate to keep oxygen flowing while simultaneously blocking the transmission of pain signals traveling up the spinal cord. Soldiers lying on the surgical table often reported feeling a strange, heavy pressure as the saw moved, rather than the sharp, unbearable tearing they expected. The adrenaline flooded the neural pathways, creating a temporary chemical barrier between the damaged tissue and the conscious mind. It is like dropping a thick, heavy wool blanket over a ringing alarm bell. The bell is still vibrating, the clapper is still striking the metal, but the sound reaching the room is muffled, distant, and oddly detached from the violence of the movement. The chemistry of fear and survival is sometimes the very mechanism that grants us a moment of impossible grace. The brain manufactures its own potent painkillers deep within the pituitary gland. As the physiological shock of the injury sets in, the body unleashes endorphins, complex chains of amino acids that function as the biological equivalents of morphine. These endogenous opioids bind to specific receptors in the brain and spinal cord, actively suppressing the release of neurotransmitters that communicate distress. While ether and chloroform were often scarce on the battlefield, the human organism brought its own internal pharmacy to the operating table. This natural chemical flood induces a stat of profound analgesia, sometimes accompanied by a mild, floating euphoria that completely detaches the patient from their physical reality. Think of a deep, dark ocean absorbing the impact of a falling stone. The surface may ripple and splash violently, but 100 feet below, the water remains perfectly still, untouched by the disturbance above, holding the depths in quiet suspension. It is a remarkable comfort to know that our biology is designed not just to perceive the world, but to gently blindfold us when the world becomes too harsh to bear. The physical signs of shock painted a stark, gray portrait of survival. A surgeon could instantly recognize a patient entering this protective state just by looking at the surface of their skin. Because blood was being aggressively routed to the internal organs, the face and limbs of the wounded soldier would become incredibly pale, taking on an ashen, almost translucent quality. Their skin would feel cold and clammy to the touch, covered in a fine layer of sweat as the sympathetic nervous system struggled to regulate temperature without adequate peripheral blood flow. Their breathing would become rapid and shallow, a desperate flutter of the diaphragm attempting to pull as much oxygen into the shrunken circulatory loop as possible. The patient looked like a candle that had been blown out, the vibrant, warm glow of life replaced by a pale, cooling wax, leaving only a thin wisp of smoke to indicate it was ever burning at all. We often associate warmth and color with vitality, but sometimes the truest sign of survival is a quiet, freezing retreat into the shadows. Extreme trauma can cause consciousness to detach itself entirely from the physical form. Beyond the chemical dampening of pain, the mind possesses a profound psychological defense known as dissociation. Faced with the unimaginable reality of surgery without anesthesia, the patient's brain would sometimes simply refuse to process the event as happening to themselves. Reports from the era describe soldiers engaging in calm, irrelevant conversations with the nurses, reciting poetry, or staring blankly at the canvas ceiling while the surgeon worked on their shattered limbs below. The sensory input of the operation was received by the nervous system, but the conscious self stepped out of the room, viewing the trauma from an immense, unbridgeable distance. It is similar to watching a terrifying storm through a very thick pane of soundproof glass. You can see the trees bending and the lightning flashing, but you cannot hear the thunder or feel the wind against your skin, leaving you as a silent observer of your own weather. When the physical vessel is irreparably breached, the mind quietly packs its bags and moves to a higher, untouched room within the house of the self. This biological fortress is only meant to be a temporary sanctuary, while physiological shock is a brilliant mechanism for surviving the immediate seconds of a catastrophic injury. It becomes lethal if it persists for too long. By depriving the extremities and the digestive tract of oxygenated blood, the cells in those areas begin to starve and die. The field surgeon had to work rapidly not only to remove the shattered limb, but to stimulate the body back into its normal circulatory rhythm. They used friction, rubbing the patient's remaining limbs, and administered small doses of warm fluids to try and coax the blood vessels to dilate and truss the outer edges of the body once again. Returning a patient from severe shock is like trying to convince a deeply frightened animal to step out of a dark cave. You cannot pull it out by force. You must carefully, gently warm the ground outside until it feels safe enough to emerge on its own. Survival is not merely the act of hiding from death, but the delicate, brave process of returning to the fragile borders of life. The physics of human muscle response dictated the need for absolute, unyielding restraint. When a sharp blade touches human skin, the nervous system bypasses conscious thought entirely and triggers an explosive, involuntary reflex. The body violently contracts its muscles to pull away from the source of the pain, an evolutionary response meant to escape the jaws of a predator or the heat of a flame. During an amputation without anesthesia, these massive, involuntary convulsions were incredibly dangerous. If a patient flailed their leg just as the surgeon was making a delicate incision near the femoral artery, the blade could slip and sever the vessel improperly, leading to a catastrophic and uncontrollable hemorrhage. To prevent this, the architecture of the surgical table relied heavily on brute, physical restraint. Strong, heavy leather straps were buckled tightly across the patient's chest, waist, and remaining healthy limbs, pinning them securely to the wooden boards. The science of the operating room became a contest of sheer mechanical leverage, anchoring the desperate, flailing energy of the human body against the immovable weight of the table. To heal the body, the surgeon first had to conquer its deepest, most primal instincts to escape. Human assistants were often required to act as living anchors. When leather straps were unavailable, or when the patient's sheer panic threatened to break them, the surgeon relied on the weight and strength of other men. Hospital stewards, orderlies, or even lightly wounded soldiers were drafted to hold the patient down. They would lean heavily on the shoulders, press their forearms across the knees, and lock their hands around the patient's wrists. This required a grim, silent coordination among the assistants, maintaining constant downward pressure against a body surging with adrenaline and terror. The physics of the restraint was simple. Apply enough opposing mass to cancel out the sudden, explosive energy of the muscle spasms. It was a deeply intimate and disturbing form of labor. These men had to physically absorb the vibrations of another person's agony, using their own bodies as the heavy stones that held a drifting, violent ship to the peak. Healing in this raw environment required the collective, silent strength of a community willing to bear the physical weight of another's suffering. The legendary act of biting the bullet provided a crucial outlet for the jaw's immense kinetic energy. During moments of extreme, inescapable pain, the human jaw instinctively clamps shut with astonishing force. The masseter muscle, which controls the closing of the jaw, is one of the strongest muscles in the human body relative to its size, capable of exerting hundreds of pounds of pressure. If a soldier ground his teeth together during the agony of surgery, the sheer mechanical force could easily crack his molars or shatter his jawbone entirely. To prevent this secondary trauma, surgeons would often place a soft piece of wood, a leather strap, or sometimes a soft lead Minié ball between the patient's teeth. Biting down hard on a yielding object gave the surging energy of the jaw somewhere safe to go. The lead would flatten and mold to the shape of the teeth, absorbing the violent kinetic energy like a soft sponge soaking up a heavy blow. It is a powerful image of resilience, finding a small, physical anchor in the mouth to help the mind weather the storm raging through the rest of the body. Sometimes, enduring the unbearable simply requires giving the energy a quiet, soft place to land. The physical act of bearing down helped stabilize the erratic rhythms of the heart. Beyond protecting the teeth, gripping a piece of wood or clenching the jaw triggered the Valsalva maneuver, a physiological response that occurs when one forcefully exhales against a closed airway. This sudden increase in pressure within the chest cavity briefly alters the blood flow returning to the heart, stimulating the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve acts as the great braking system of the body, sending signals to the heart to slow its frantic, terrified beating. By giving the patient something to bite down on, the surgeon was unwittingly employing a natural neurological mechanism to regulate the patient's cardiovascular system during the height of the trauma. The simple, mechanical act of clenching the jaw sent a quiet, internal command to the chest, demanding a momentary slowing of the blood. Even in the darkest moments of medical history, the intricate wiring of the human body offered small, hidden pathways of relief. We are engineered to fight for equilibrium, even when the world is tearing us apart. The restraint of the body stood in stark contrast to the freedom of the voice. While the limbs were bound tight by leather and human hands, the patient's voice was the only part of them that remained entirely free. The surgical tents echoed with a chaotic symphony of human endurance, prayers, curses, sharp intakes of breath, and deep, guttural groans. Some soldiers screamed until their vocal cords were raw, while others fell into an eerie, rhythmic chanting, reciting the names of their families or the lyrics of familiar songs. This vocalization was not merely a reaction to pain. It was a profound psychological release valve. The sheer volume of the voice allowed the mind to project its terror outward, pushing the heavy, suffocating weight of the experience into the air around them. Think of a steam engine building massive internal pressure. The whistle does not stop the fire, but it gives the boiling energy a vital, loud escape, preventing the iron boiler from exploding. The sounds of the hospital tent were not just noise. They were the invisible, acoustic exhaust of the human soul trying desperately to survive its own physical collapse. The profound stillness following the procedure was a heavy, exhausted silence. When the operation concluded and the leather straps were finally unbuckled, the patient rarely moved. The frantic, explosive energy that had fought the restraints was entire. Why spent, leaving the body slack and deeply exhausted? The muscles, having strained so violently against the unyielding leather, were flooded with lactic acid, feeling heavy and profoundly weak. The assistants would step back, their own arms aching from the effort of holding the patient down, and the tent would suddenly fall quiet. The silence was not peaceful. It was the hollow, ringing quiet that follows the passing of a violent storm. The body, untethered at last, seemed to sink heavily into the wooden table, as if gravity itself had suddenly doubled in strength. It is a moment of stark vulnerability, realizing that the fight is over, the restraints are gone, and all that remains is the slow, quiet, and uncertain work of beginning again. Ether and chloroform were known to medical science, but their presence on the battlefield was a fragile logistical gamble. Decades before the conflict, the chemical suppression of pain had been discovered, yet delivering these volatile liquids to a moving army was a profound challenge. Both ether and chloroform are highly unstable compounds that evaporate rapidly when exposed to the open air or extreme heat. They were transported in fragile glass bottles packed inside wooden crates, hauled by horse-drawn wagons over miles of deeply rutted, unpaved roads. A single violent jolt could shatter a crate, leaving the precious chemical vapor to dissipate uselessly into the dirt and summer wind. Even when intact, the high temperatures of a July encampment could cause the stoppers to blow out from the building internal pressure. The surgeons were constantly fighting a losing battle against the basic physics of evaporation and the brutal mechanics of 19th-century transport. It was like trying to carry a captured pocket of fog across a continent without letting it slip through your fingers. The most powerful shields against human suffering are often the most fragile to transport into the heart of the storm. When available, chloroform brought a heavy, sweet-smelling darkness to the surgical table. To administer this true anesthetic, a surgeon would typically pour a few drops of the clear, dense liquid onto a sponge or a hollow cloth cone. This cone was then placed gently over the nose and mouth of the terrified patient. As the soldier inhaled, the chemical vapor crossed the thin membranes of the lungs and entered the bloodstream, rushing immediately to the central nervous system. Chloroform works by aggressively disrupting the synaptic transmissions in the brain, essentially blocking the electrical signals that allow the conscious mind to communicate with the physical body. The patient would smell a sickly, heavy sweetness, and then feel a sudden, profound heaviness pulling them downward into a deep, dreamless chemical twilight. The frantic, terrified thrashing would slow. The muscles would surrender their tension, and the body would become a quiet, unresisting canvas for the surgeon's blade. It is a strange and beautiful thought that a state of absolute, unfeeling peace can be poured from a small glass vial and breathed into existence. In the absence of true anesthetics, surgeons relied on the blunt pharmacological force of heavy alcohol. When the glass bottles of chloroform ran dry, which happened with alarming frequency after major engagements, the medical corps turned to whiskey and brandy. Unlike ether, which specifically targets and isolates the pathways of pain and consciousness, alcohol is a broad, systemic central nervous system depressant. When consumed in large quantities, ethanol molecules flood the brain and bind to GABA receptors, heavily suppressing the overall electrical activity of the entire neurological network. It does not actually erase the sensation of pain. Rather, it drastically slows the brain's ability to process and react to the incoming distress signals from the severed nerves. It is not a precision instrument cutting a specific wire to disable an alarm, but rather a heavy, blunt hammer striking the main power grid, dimming every light in the house simultaneously. When the elegant tools of medical science are absent, survival often requires falling back on the crude, heavy instruments of the earth. Using whiskey for surgery required pushing the human body to the very edge of toxic poisoning. To achieve a level of intoxication deep enough to be useful during an amputation, the surgeon had to administer a massive, dangerous dose of alcohol. A simple warming drink was useless against the heavy blade of the capital saw. The patient had to be pushed past the point of simple drunkenness, deep into a state of semi-comatose stupor, where the gag reflex weakens and the heart rate fluctuates wildly. This was a treacherous pharmacological tightrope. If the surgeon gave too little, the patient would still feel the agony and fight the restraints. If they gave too much, the alcohol would completely suppress the brainstem's autonomic control of the lungs, causing the patient to simply stop breathing on the table. The doctor was deliberately forcing the soldier to the absolute precipice of chemical poisoning to save them from surgical shock. It is a terrifying paradox of early medicine. Sometimes, the cure demands that we walk the fragile organism dangerously close to a completely different kind of ruin. The true, silent companion of the era's agony was found in the milky sap of the opium poppy. While alcohol was a crude depressant, the alkaloid compounds derived from the poppy flower offered a highly specific, biological lock-and-key solution to human pain. Morphine, the active narcotic element of opium, is chemically shaped to perfectly fit the mu-opioid receptors clustered in the human brain and spinal cord. When these receptors are activated by the morphine molecules, they act as massive, heavy floodgates, physically blocking the release of neurotransmitters that carry pain signals up to the conscious mind. It does not merely dull the mind like alcohol. It actively intercepts the message of trauma before it can be read by the brain. A soldier given a heavy dose of opium pills or liquid laudanum would find the roaring fire of a shattered limb reduced to a distant, manageable warmth. It is a profound and comforting mystery of biology that a fragile, delicate flower swaying in a distant field holds the exact chemical geometry required to unlock the human prison of suffering. Morphine was frequently administered directly into the raw tissue of the surgical wound. Because the hypodermic needle was still a new and highly uncommon invention during the early 1860s, doctors had to find other ways to introduce these powerful alkaloids into the bloodstream. One of the most common and striking methods was to take dry, powdered morphine sulfate and physically rub it into the raw, exposed flesh of the amputation stump before sewing the skin flaps closed. The vast, open network of severed capillaries and tiny blood vessels in the open wound acted as a massive, highly efficient sponge. The powder dissolved instantly into the wet tissue, crossing directly into the circulatory system without having to survive the acidic environment of the stomach. The surgeon was quite literally planting the chemical seeds of relief directly into the freshly turned earth of the injury. The wound itself became the doorway through which its own salvation was granted. It is a reminder that the body, even when broken, remains deeply receptive to the possibility of grace. The relief provided by these powerful alkaloids carried a silent, lingering shadow. The biological interaction between morphine and the human nervous system is so profound that it alters the internal landscape of the body. When a patient relies on heavy doses of external opiates to survive the weeks of agonizing recovery, their brain gradually stops producing its own natural painkillers, the endorphins. The opioid receptors begin to demand the presence of the poppy's alkaloid to function normally. When the physical wound finally closed and the soldier was sent home, they often carried a deep, invisible chemical reliance with them, a condition that came to be known quietly as the soldier's disease. The body had built its entire architecture of peace on a borrowed foundation, and without the medicine, the nervous system would plunge into the physical agony of withdrawal. It is the quiet tragedy of all profound interventions. A medicine designed to end a war within the flesh can sometimes quietly start an entirely new, invisible battle within the blood. The first cut was an exercise in precise spatial geometry. To leave the patient with a functional, healing stump, the surgeon could not simply sever the limb in a straight, flat line. If the skin and muscle were cut at the exact same level as the bone, the retracting tissues would leave the raw end of the bone exposed to the open air, ensuring massive infection. Instead, the surgeon had to think like a master tailor working with living fabric. Using a large, incredibly sharp amputation knife, they carved deep, sweeping semicircles into the healthy tissue below the point of injury. These carefully measured flaps of skin and superficial fat were then physically pulled back, folding them upward toward the body like the cuffs of a heavy winter coat being rolled to the elbow. The science of this initial incision lay in understanding the elasticity and natural tension of the human dermis. The surgeon had to calculate the exact square footage of skin needed to comfortably wrap around the future stump, without pulling too tightly or tearing the newly formed stitches. We are wrapped in a seamless, living envelope that must be carefully, mathematically unstitched before the heavier internal work can truly begin. Severing the deep muscle required a forceful separation of highly intertwined fibers. Beneath the skin lies the massive, dense machinery of human locomotion. The muscles of the thick H or the calf are not single, uniform blocks, but intricate bundles of fibrous tissue, rich in blood and designed to contract with immense power. Once the outer skin flaps were peeled back, the surgeon used a different blade, often called a catiling, which was long and double-edged. With a swift, continuous circular motion, they sliced directly inward toward the center, cutting through the dense, heavy meat of the limb. Because muscle is highly elastic, the moment it was severed, it violently snapped back upward toward the torso, pulling away from the blade like thick, heavy rubber bands suddenly breaking under immense tension. To prevent the muscles from interfering with the saw, an assistant would often wrap a wide linen cloth around the exposed tissue and pull upward with all their strength, physically dragging the heavy muscle mass out of the way. The raw strength that allows us to walk and lift is abruptly turned into a dense, physical obstacle that must be firmly and powerfully pulled aside. The bone itself is wrapped in a highly sensitive, invisible sleeve. We often think of the skeleton as a dry, dead framework hidden beneath the living flesh, but human bone is deeply alive. Before a surgeon could apply the heavy teeth of the capital saw to a femur or a humerus, they had to address a microscopic layer called the periosteum. This is a thin, incredibly tough, and densely innervated membrane that tightly hugs the outer surface of all bones, feeding them with microscopic blood vessels. If the saw tore through this layer violently, it would leave ragged, hanging edges that would later ossify into sharp, agonizing bone spurs beneath the healed skin. Therefore, the surgeon used a small, sharp blade to carefully scrape the periosteum away from the area to be cut, pushing it upward to expose the naked, white calcium beneath. It was a delicate, grating procedure, akin to stripping the thin, green bark away from a wet branch to reveal the pale wood inside. Even the hardest, most rigid architecture of the body is clothed in a fragile, feeling skin of its own. The heavy amputation saw operated on the simple, brutal physics of deep friction. When the bone was finally exposed and cleared of its soft coverings, the surgeon reached for the heavy steel. The teeth of the saw did not slice like a scalpel. They worked by aggressively tearing away microscopic grains of calcium phosphate. The surgeon would place the heel of the blade against the bone and draw it backward slowly to carve a guiding groove, ensuring the steel would not slip and shred the surrounding retracted muscle. Once the track was set, they employed long, smooth, powerful strokes, utilizing the entire length of the blade. They did not need to press down forcefully. The heavy weight of the steel spine provided enough downward kinetic energy to do the work. The operating tent would fill with a distinctive, dry, hollow sound, a rapid mechanical rhythm vastly different from the wet, soft tearing of flesh. It is a profound mechanical act, turning the solid, load-bearing pillar of a human life into fine, white dust with the steady rhythm of heavy steel. The final moments of the cut demanded a delicate mastery of gravity. As the teeth of the saw bit deeper and approached the far side of the bone, the physical dynamics of the operation became incredibly perilous. The severed portion of the limb was heavy, filled with dense muscle and pooling fluids. If the assistant holding the foot allowed the leg to drop even a fraction of an inch before the cut was complete, the heavy weight of gravity would snap the final sliver of bone, rather than letting the saw cut cleanly through. This would leave a sharp, jagged spike of calcium sticking out of the stump, an architectural flaw that would tear through the healing skin flaps from the inside. To prevent this, the assistant had to hold the dying limb perfectly level and steady, acting as a flawless human vice. Simultaneously, the surgeon had to radically lighten his strokes, turning the heavy, aggressive sawing into a soft, cautious whisper of steel against the remaining bridge of bone. The separation of what is lost from what remains must always be managed with a gentle, perfect balance. Any remaining imperfections in the skeleton had to be manually filed away. Even with the most precise cut, the sheer mechanical trauma of the saw often left the outer rim of the severed bone slightly rough or sharp. The surgeon could not simply leave this abrasive edge inside the body, as it would constantly grind against the soft tissue folded over it, causing endless internal bleeding and chronic pain. Reaching into the velvet box, the doctor would retrieve a bone rasp, a heavy metal tool that closely resembled a carpenter's file, covered in hard, abrasive cross-hatching. With firm, deliberate strokes, they would run the rasp over the exposed circumference of the cut bone, physically sanding down the sharp corners and rounding the edge till it was smooth to the touch. The body's internal architecture, violently altered by the war, was now being reshaped and polished by hand. It is a striking image of care amidst destruction, gently filing down the sharp edges of a broken foundation so the house can learn to stand on it once more. The human vascular network is a high-pressure, closed hydraulic system. The heart pumps blood with astonishing force, sending it rushing through the major arteries of the limbs to deliver oxygen to the furthest extremities. When a limb is amputated, this vast, pressurized loop is violently severed, turning closed pipes into open, rapidly draining spigots. The physical laws of fluid dynamics dictate that unless this system is immediately sealed, the entire volume of the body's blood will follow the path of least resistance and simply flow out into the open air. The surgeon must shift instantly from the destructive act of sawing bone to the intricate, life-saving work of plumbing. They are no longer dismantling the house. They are desperately trying to cap the rushing pipes in the basement before the foundation washes away entirely. The heavy, chaotic mechanics of the saw are replaced by the delicate, frantic search for tiny, severed tubes. It is a stark reminder that we are largely made of water, held together only by the fragile integrity of our internal boundaries. The sudden, slight loosening of the tourniquet serves as a terrifying biological map. Once the limb is gone, The large canvas strap clamped high on the thigh is slowly, carefully relaxed by an assistant. This is not to restore full circulation, but to allow just enough pressure back into the system to reveal the exact locations of the severed blood vessels. As the heavy brass screw is turned, the pale, bloodless stump suddenly blooms with bright crimson markers. The major arteries, like the femoral or brachial, pulse with a rhythmic, high-pressure spray that matches the beating of the heart, while the smaller veins well up with a slow, dark, steady flow. The surgeon uses the body's own escaping life force to illuminate the exact points of failure in the dark, retracted muscle. It is a moment of controlled crisis, briefly letting the storm back into the room so the architect can see exactly where the roof is leaking. Healing often requires us to momentarily witness the very danger we are trying to stop. Arteries possess a fierce, muscular instinct to retreat and hide from injury. Unlike the thin, passive walls of veins, human arteries are lined with a thick layer of smooth muscle tissue. When violently severed, this muscle instantly and automatically contracts, causing the vessel to shrink in diameter and pull itself deep backward into the surrounding flesh. It is a brilliant, evolutionary defense mechanism designed to minimize blood loss, but it creates a maddening challenge for the surgeon. The doctor must hunt for these retreating, slippery tubes within the chaotic landscape of the wound. Using the small, sharp-hooked instrument known as a tenaculum, they probe the wet muscle, piercing the thick white wall of the hiding artery, and physically dragging it back out into the open air. The tiny steel hook must catch the edge of the vessel just as a fisherman blindly hooks a resisting line in dark, murky water. Sometimes, saving a life requires forcefully pulling the body's own defenses out of the shadows. Simple strands of silk and horsehair were the primary materials used to build these biological dams. In the absence of modern synthetic polymers or electrocautery devices, 19th-century surgeons relied on the strongest natural fibers available to them. Black silk thread was heavily favored for the major arteries because of its high tensile strength and smooth texture, allowing it to be pulled tightly without snapping under immense pressure. For smaller, more delicate vessels, a single strand of heavy horsehair was often used. These fibers were kept in the surgeon's pockets or draped over the buttons of their coats, readily available for the frantic moments of hemostasis. The science of stopping a massive hemorrhage relied on the simple, physical friction of a knot tied in a thread spun by a moth or harvested from a field animal. It is a beautiful, fragile thought that the roaring, high-pressure engine of the human heart was held in check by a tiny loop of ordinary silk. The tying of the surgical knot is an exercise in extreme microscopic tension. Once the tenaculum pulled the artery into view, the surgeon or their assistant would rapidly loop a piece of silk thread around the exposed vessel. They used a specific technique, often a square knot or a surgeon's knot, which incorporates an extra twist in the first throw to prevent the slippery thread from loosening. The physical application of pressure is a masterclass in tactile feedback. The surgeon must pull the ends of the silk just hard enough to completely crush the inner lining of the artery toe. They're permanently stopping the flow of blood, but not so hard that the thin thread slices through the delicate tissue like a wire through soft clay. They gauge this perfect point of tension entirely through the subtle resistance felt in their fingertips. It is a microscopic balancing act, relying on the quiet intelligence of the hands to bind the fragile rivers of the body. A miraculous, secondary network of hidden pathways awakens to sustain the remaining tissue. When a massive conduit like the femoral artery is permanently tied off with a silk thread, the primary road delivering oxygen to the stump is gone forever. Yet, the tissue does not immediately die. The human vascular system is incredibly redundant, built with an intricate web of tiny, alternative vessels known as collateral circulation. When the main highway is blocked, the sudden drop in downstream blood pressure triggers these tiny side streets to slowly dilate and expand. Over the coming weeks, these microscopic vessels will widen, taking on the heavy burden of carrying the blood flow around the surgical dam to keep the surviving skin and muscle alive. The body possesses a quiet, genius architecture that automatically redraws its own internal maps when the main roads are destroyed. We are engineered with hidden reserves, waiting quietly in the dark to carry us forward when our primary paths are lost. The trailing ends of the silk ligatures were deliberately left hanging outside the closed wound, because 19th century silk and horsehair were not absorbable by the human body. They could not simply be left sealed inside the patient. If the wound was closed completely over them, the foreign material would act as a permanent anchor for severe internal infection. Therefore, surgeons left one long end of every tied thread trailing out of the corner of the stitched skin flap. As the days passed, the tightly crushed tissue at the end of the tied artery would slowly necrose and rot away. After a week or two, the surgeon would walk through the ward and gently tug on the trailing silk threads hanging from the patient's stump. If the artery had safely healed and sealed itself further up, the dead tissue would give way, and the silk knot would slip out of the body with a sickening, wet release. The process of healing required leaving a deliberate, visible string attached to the trauma, a physical line connecting the patient to their survival until the body was finally ready to let it go. The greatest enemy of the 19th century surgeon was entirely invisible to the naked eye. In the 1860s, the intricate, teeming world of microbiology was a dark, undiscovered continent. Doctors understood the macromechanics of bone and blood, but they had absolutely no concept of bacteria, viruses, or the microscopic fungi that blanketed every surface of their reality. They operated under the profound assumption that if a tool looked clean and lacked visible debris, it was perfectly safe to introduce into the deep tissues of a human body. They could not see the millions of microscopic organisms clinging to the fibers of their woolen coats, the wooden handles of their saws, or the tiny crevices beneath their fingernails. It is like trying to defend a fortress against an invading army while wearing a blindfold, fighting the physical breaches in the wall while completely unaware of the silent saboteurs slipping through the gates. The tragedy of this era was not a lack of compassion, but a profound limitation of human vision. We are only as safe as our ability to perceive the dangers that surround us. The biological byproduct of a raging infection was celebrated as a vital sign of healing. Because nearly every surgical wound in this era became infected, doctors came to view the inevitable arrival of thick, white or yellowish pus as a natural, necessary stage of human recovery. They called it laudable pus, a term denoting praise and approval, believing it was the body's way of naturally purging bad humors and corrupted fluids from the severed tissue. In reality, this substance was the biological wreckage of a massive, unseen war happening at the cellular level. Pus is primarily composed of dead white blood cells, the body's microscopic infantry, along with dead tissue and the defeated cellular bodies of invading bacteria. When a surgeon saw this thick fluid coating a stump, they felt a sense of relief, entirely misinterpreting the grim casualty report of the immune system as a sign of architectural progress. It is a stunning example of how our minds can frame disaster as victory when we do not understand the language of the battlefield. What we perceive as a comforting sunrise is sometimes just the glow of a distant, burning city. The very hands that sought to save lives were the silent carriers of a microscopic plague. A dedicated surgeon might stand at his wooden operating table for 12 continuous hours after a major battle, moving rapidly from one red soldier to the next. Between amputations, he might quickly wipe his blood-slicked hands on a dirty canvas apron or dip them into a basin of cold, unchanged water, just enough to secure a firm grip on the scalpel for the next procedure. There was no scrubbing with carbolic acid, no sterile latex gloves, and no understanding that the invisible flora of one dying man's wound was being directly transplanted into the freshly opened veins of the next. The surgeon became an unwitting vector, a biological bridge connecting the suffering of hundreds of isolated bodies into a single, shared microscopic catastrophe. The dedication of the healer was weaponized against the patient by the simple, indifferent mechanics of cross-contamination. It is a quiet, devastating irony that the deepest acts of human care can sometimes carry the invisible seeds of destruction. A simple sea sponge was one of the most deadly instruments in the entire medical encampment. To keep the surgical field clear of pooling blood and fluids, surgeons relied on natural sea sponges, harvested from the ocean floor and dried for medical use. Their highly porous, absorbent cellular structure made them incredibly effective at soaking up heavy bleeding during a chaotic amputation. However, this same beautiful, intricate physical architecture made the sponge an absolute paradise for bacterial colonies. After an operation, the blood-soaked sponge was casually squeezed out in a bucket of tepid water, and immediately pressed deep into the open, vulnerable wound of the very next soldier in line. Deep within the tiny, dark caverns of the sponge, a terrifying concentration of Staphylococcus and Streptococcus bacteria thrived and multiplied, protected from the air and fed by the constant supply of warm human fluid. The object used to bring clarity and vision to the surgeon's eyes was quietly painting the tissue with an invisible, lethal poison. It is a reminder that the tools we use to clean the surface often hide the deepest, darkest impurities within their own core. The hospital ward cultivated specific, terrifying predators that thrived in the dark. When the microscopic infections took hold, they manifested in horrifying systemic diseases that swept through the recovery tents like a silent wind. Erysipelas, a severe bacterial infection of the upper layers of the skin, would paint a patient's limb with a raised, furiously red rash that spread visibly by the hour, burning with a profound, radiating heat. Even more feared was hospital gangrene, a rapidly progressive tissue necrosis that literally dissolved healthy muscle and skin into a foul, gray, liquefying mass. These conditions were not caused by the initial bullet, but by the aggressive, opportunistic bacteria that colonized the wound long after the surgery was over. The doctors fought these invisible monsters by painting the rotting tissue with harsh acids or iodine, desperately trying to burn away the corruption they could see without understanding the microscopic life causing it. The human body became a rich, defenseless soil for invasive species that had patiently waited for the skin to be broken. It is a chilling realization that the earth is always waiting to reclaim the biological material we fail to protect. The human organism was forced to fight a desperate, exhausting war on two entirely different scales. The soldier recovering in the field hospital was not just healing from a massive mechanical amputation. While their conscious mind endured the agonizing, throbbing pain of the severed bone and the tight, pulling stitches of the heavy silk, their immune system was fighting a frantic, unseen battle against millions of rapidly dividing microscopic invaders. The body had to expend massive amounts of metabolic energy to generate white blood cells and elevate its core temperature into a rolling, dangerous fever, attempting to literally cook the bacteria out of the blood. The patient would lay shivering on a canvas cot, sweating profusely in the summer heat, their heart racing as the internal machinery of survival operated at its absolute maximum capacity. The visible wound was only a tiny fraction of the biological trauma being endured. The true battle for the patient's life was happening in the dark, silent rivers of their own circulatory system. To survive in that era required a staggering, quiet endurance of the flesh that borders on the miraculous. The architecture of early survival was woven from fragile canvas and repurposed timber. When the scale of casualties overwhelmed existing structures, medical corps relied on massive, sweeping tents pitched hurriedly in open fields, or commandeered local barns and rural churches. These were not the sterile, sealed, climate-controlled environments of modern medicine. They were highly porous structures, offering little more than a thin layer of sailcloth or wooden slats between the vulnerable patient and the vast, indifferent mechanics of nature. The YND would constantly ripple the heavy canvas roofs, snapping the ropes and pulling at the wooden stakes driven into the soil. Rain would drum heavily overhead, sometimes leaking through the seams to drip directly onto the canvas cots below. The hospital was essentially a fragile pocket of air trapped on the edge of a battlefield, a temporary and highly vulnerable sanctuary. The human organism, already fighting a desperate internal battle for survival, was simultaneously subjected to the raw, unfiltered forces of the outside world. It is a profound realization that healing often had to occur in spaces that were just as fragile as the bodies they housed. The flow of wind through the wards was viewed as the primary medicine of the atmosphere, because 19th-century medicine believed that invisible, corrupted air caused disease. The design of these field hospitals prioritized massive, continuous ventilation. Surgeons insisted on raising the flaps of the tents or keeping the heavy wooden doors of barns wide open, regardless of the season. They were trying to chase away the foul-smelling miasmas, the heavy odors of sickness and decay, by inviting the strong currents of the natural wind to sweep through the rows of cots. This fierce commitment to fresh air ironically saved countless lives, though not for the reasons the doctors believed. The constant circulation dispersed the concentrated droplets of respiratory illnesses and diluted the microscopic bacterial load suspended in the humid air of the crowded wards. The wind acted as a massive, invisible broom, sweeping away the microscopic dangers the surgeons could not see. It is a beautiful paradox that a completely flawed scientific theory led to a genuinely life-saving architectural practice. We sometimes stumble into the light while actively chasing a shadow. The struggle for biological equilibrium was heavily dictated by the shifting seasons. A patient recovering from a massive amputation has already lost a significant portion of their blood volume, making it incredibly difficult for their circulatory system to regulate core body temperature. In the suffocating, humid heat of a July encampment, the canvas tents transformed into stagnant ovens. The human body had to expend massive amounts of metabolic energy sweating to keep the brain from overheating, energy it desperately needed to knit broken tissue back together. Conversely, during the bitter winter campaigns, patients lay on thin straw pallets as freezing winds swept through the mandatory open ventilation flaps. The diminished blood flow could not reach the extremities, leading to profound shivering that violently shook the fresh surgical ligatures and exhausted the weakened muscles. The internal machinery of the human body was forced to fight a grueling, two-front war against both surgical trauma and the extreme ambient temperature. A body fighting to repair its foundation should not also have to fight to keep the house warm. The acoustic environment of recovery offered no sanctuary for the exhausted mind. Modern hospitals are engineered for quiet, utilizing acoustic tiles and insulated walls to grant the nervous system the peace it requires to heal. The field hospital, however, was immersed in a continuous, overwhelming wave of sound. The deep, rhythmic thud of distant artillery fire would literally vibrate through the wooden legs of the cots and into the bones of the patients. This military thunder was layered beneath the immediate, relentless sounds of the ward itself. The sharp cries of new arrivals, the delirious murmurs of men burning with fever, and the harsh, metallic scraping of the surgeon's saw at the front of the tent. There was no silence to allow the brain to easily slip into the restorative depths of sleep. The auditory cortex was constantly stimulated, keeping the sympathetic nervous system locked in a state of high alert, flooding the blood with stress hormones when the body craved deep rest. It is a heavy burden to ask a shattered mind to find its own quiet when the world refuses to stop screaming. The floor of the surgical theater was often nothing more than the raw, yielding earth. While some hospitals were established in proper buildings with hardwood floors, many of the largest receiving stations simply rested on the dirt of a farmer's field or the crushed grass of an orchard. As operations continued hour after hour, the fluids of the procedure, the water from the basins, the blood from the arteries, did not fall onto easily washed linoleum. They fell directly onto the soil. The ground beneath the operating tables became a slick, heavy mud, making it difficult for the surgeons and assistants to maintain their footing as they fought to restrain the thrashing patients. They were quite literally standing in the biological wreckage of the conflict, the earth slowly drinking in the consequences of the war. This direct, unfiltered contact with the soil meant that the microscopic flora of the earth was always present in the air and on the boots of the men attempting to heal. The boundary between the human organism and the ground it walks upon is never thinner than in the frantic moments of survival. The delicate geometry of the human interior was often navigated by failing, unsteady light. When the chaotic influx of the wounded pushed the surgical work deep into the night, the medical corps lost the brilliant, revealing power of the sun. They were forced to rely on the soft, flickering glow of candles, kerosene lanterns, or simple torches staked into the dirt. These light sources were incredibly dim and highly unstable, casting long, shifting shadows across the complex, bloody landscape of a severed limb. A surgeon searching for a retracted artery with a tiny steel tenaculum had to strain their eyes, trying to distinguish the pale white wall of a blood vessel from the yellow fat and red muscle in the heavy gloom. The flickering light played tricks on the optic nerve, making the raw tissue seem to move and shift independently. To perform a masterclass in anatomical precision using the wavering light of a burning wick is a testament to the incredible tactile memory of the human hand. Even when our vision is stolen by the night, our hands can often remember the shape of the work that must be done. The sudden, overwhelming scale of human trauma birthed a fiercely organized force of caregivers. Prior to the 1860s, the role of a professional nurse in a hospital setting was largely undefined, often relegated to untrained attendants or those simply doing charitable work. The staggering number of casualties abruptly transformed the wards, drawing thousands of women and convalescent men into the desperate, crowded spaces of the field hospitals. They arrived into a landscape of unimaginable acoustic and visual chaos, where the surgeons were entirely consumed by the heavy, mechanical demands of the operating tables. These new caregivers did not carry the heavy saws or the delicate silk ligatures. Instead, they brought an intense, systematic order to the aftermath of the blade. They organized the rows of cots, established systems for feeding the immobilized, and created the first true defensive lines of hospital hygiene. It is like watching a quiet, determined tide roll in to smooth the jagged, chaotic sands of a ruined beach. Sometimes, the most profound medical intervention is simply the steady, unyielding introduction of quiet order. The most vital chemical medicine administered in the wards was often simple, clean water. When a human being loses a massive amount of blood and enters a state of post-surgical shock, the circulatory system desperately needs to replenish its fluid volume to keep the heart pumping effectively. Furthermore, the inevitable bacterial infections caused rolling, consuming fevers that rapidly evaporated the body's remaining moisture through sweat. The nurses became the vital managers of human hydration, constantly walking the narrow aisles between the cots with tin dippers of water, warm tea, and thin beef broth. They were manually sustaining the fluid dynamics of hundreds of failing bodies, offering small sips to men too weak to lift their own heads. The biological mechanics of survival rely heavily on the simple presence of water to transport oxygen, flush cellular waste, and regulate the internal furnace of the metabolism. Think of rain falling gently on a deeply cracked, parched desert landscape, slowly coaxing the dry earth back to life. The fundamental building blocks of human survival are often the most ordinary, overlooked elements of the earth. The fight against invisible microscopic predators began with the grueling physical mechanics of scrubbing. While the surgeons unknowingly carried bacteria from wound to wound on their unwashed hands, the nurses instinctively fought a war against the physical accumulation of filth. They did not know the specific shapes of Staphylococcus or Streptococcus, but they understood that a clean ward smelled different and healed faster than a dirty one. They engaged in endless back-breaking labor, boiling blood-soaked linens in massive iron kettles, scrubbing the wooden floorboards with harsh lye soap, and constantly emptying the heavy wooden buckets of biological waste. They were physically altering the environment of the ward, inadvertently stripping away the rich, warm organic matter that bacteria required to rapidly multiply. By maintaining the severe cleanliness of the surfaces, they were blindly, yet effectively, pushing back the dark ocean of disease. It is a powerful reminder that true healing requires holding the physical boundaries against the quiet, constant decay of the world. A calm human voice acts as a powerful biological regulator for a terrified nervous system. The psychological trauma of the recovery ward was immense. Soldiers lay paralyzed by pain, thousands of miles from their families, staring at the canvas sea, ailing as their bodies fought off aggressive infections. In this profound isolation, the presence of a nurse sitting quietly by the bedside offered a profound neurological anchor. When a patient hears a soft, reassuring voice or feels a steady hand resting on their uninjured shoulder, the brain responds by lowering the production of cortisol, the stress hormone that drives panic and accelerates heart rate. This simple human connection stimulates the release of oxytocin, a chemical that promotes feelings of safety and slows the frantic rhythms of the chest. The nurses wrote letters home for the dying, read quietly from worn books, and simply held the hands of those who were slipping away. They were a lighthouse beam cutting through the isolating, terrifying fog of pain. We are deeply social organisms, and sometimes we can only find our way back to life by holding firmly onto another person. The regulation of a patient's core temperature required constant, tactile vigilance. The human body operates within a very narrow, delicate thermal window. As the infections raged, a soldier's temperature could spike dangerously high, threatening to literally cook the proteins in the brain, or plummet into violent, exhausting chills as the circulatory system faltered. The nurses became the manual thermostats for these struggling engines. When the fevers burned, they applied cool, wet compresses to the forehead and the back of the neck, using the simple physics of evaporation to draw the heavy heat out of the blood vessels close to the skin. When the chills took hold, they layered heavy wool blankets and placed heated bricks wrapped in flannel at the patient's feet, trying to force warmth back into the freezing extremities. They learned to read the subtle changes in the skin, feeling the shift from a dry, dangerous heat to the cool, breaking sweat of a fever finally breaking. Survival is a delicate, shifting balance of heat and cold, carefully maintained by the watchful, patient hands of another. The removal of blood-soaked bandages was a delicate negotiation with newly formed tissue. Surgical wounds were typically wrapped in layers of heavy cotton or linen to absorb the weeping fluids. Over a few days, the dried blood and serum acted as a powerful, natural glue, cementing the coarse fabric directly to the raw, healing flesh underneath. If a nurse pulled the bandage away too quickly, it would violently rip off the microscopic, fragile layer of new cells, the granulation tissue, that the body was desperately trying to build across the open gap. This would instantly restart the bleeding and reset the entire healing process. To prevent this, they used warm water or mild saline to slowly, patiently soak the hardened bandages, softening the biological cement. They peeled the fabric back millimeter by millimeter, coaxing the cloth away from the flesh without disturbing the quiet, microscopic architecture being built below. It is like unwrapping a fragile, deeply damaged chrysalis to check on the life inside. True healing cannot be rushed or violently forced. It must be gently coaxed into the light. Their collective efforts laid the invisible foundation for modern medical hygiene. The women and men who walked the wards did not write the surgical textbooks of the era, nor did they invent the chemical anesthetics that would later conquer pain. But their obsessive, relentless focus on cleanliness, continuous hydration, quiet comfort, and environmental order drastically reduced the mortality rates in the hospitals they managed. They proved, through sheer mechanical repetition and compassionate observation, that the environment in which a patient recovers is just as critical as the speed of the surgeon's saw. Their quiet, uncelebrated labor formed the practical evidence that would eventually support the germ theory of disease, changing the architecture of hospitals forever. They planted the heavy seeds of a massive, life-saving forest in the deep, chaotic mud of a battlefield. The quiet, repetitive acts of care often rewrite the entire future of human survival. The human brain often refuses to immediately accept the sudden physical absence of a severed limb. While the surgeon's blade removes the flesh and bone in a matter of minutes, the intricate neurological map deeply embedded within the brain's somatosensory cortex remains completely intact. This vast network of neurons has spent a lifetime receiving a constant, quiet stream of sensory data from the toes, the fingers, and the joints. When the physical limb is suddenly gone, the brain does not instantly erase the map. Instead, it continues to search for the missing signals, and in the absence of input, it begins to generate its own. The recovering soldier would lie on his canvas cot, staring down at the empty space at the end of his blanket, while clearly feeling the distinct sensation of his missing toes curling, or an unbearable, agonizing cramp in a calf muscle that no longer exists. Ted, on this earth, the nervous system creates a vivid, incredibly detailed ghost of the lost anatomy. We are haunted not just by the memories of our past, but by the lingering, invisible outlines of our own missing pieces. The severed nerve endings do not simply go quiet when they are violently cut by the capital saw. Inside the healing stump, the microscopic biological wiring of the human body desperately attempts to repair the catastrophic damage. The severed axons of the major nerves begin to grow outward, blindly searching in the dark for the muscles and skin receptors they were once connected to. When they encounter the thick, impenetrable wall of surgical scar tissue, they cannot push through. Trapped, these highly sensitive nerve fibers coil tightly back upon themselves, forming dense, highly reactive microscopic masses known as neuromas. These tangled knots of raw electrical tissue are incredibly unstable. The slightest pressure, or even a sudden drop in barometric pressure in the atmosphere, can cause them to misfire, sending chaotic, blinding bursts of electrical static shooting straight up the spinal cord to the brain. When a massive bridge is destroyed, the live wires do not simply vanish. They spark and arc wildly into the empty air, forever searching for a connection that the world has taken away. The remaining physical tissue of the amputated limb undergoes a profound, slow-motion architectural transformation. Once the wound is finally sewn shut, and the fierce bacterial infections are defeated, the body begins the long, quiet process of adapting to its new mechanical reality. Without the long leverage of the missing bone to pull against, the heavy, powerful muscles of the thigh or the upper arm no longer have a physiological purpose. The human body is a fiercely efficient metabolic economy. It will not spend precious calories maintaining tissue that does no work. Over several months, these massive muscle bundles begin to slowly atrophy, literally dissolving and shrinking as the body reclaims the proteins. The shape of the stump gradually transforms from a thick, swollen cylinder into a tapered, bony cone. The skin, once stretched tight over dense, working meat, becomes loose and fragile. It is a slow, silent dismantling of the original machinery, reshaping the landscape of the flesh to perfectly match the quiet emptiness of the new reality. To restore the geometry of human locomotion, engineers turn to the patient, carved wood of the silent forests. As thousands of amputees return to a society built for whole bodies, the demand for physical restoration birthed a massive surge in the science of prosthetics. Instead of heavy, cumbersome peg legs, craftsmen began carving intricate, hollowed-out limbs from the lightweight, highly flexible wood of the willow tree. They meticulously shaped the wooden sockets to perfectly match the unique, tapered topography of each individual soldier's healed stump. These wooden shells were then fitted with heavy leather straps, steel hinges, and thick rubber bumpers to simulate the natural flexion of the human ankle and knee. The engineers were desperately trying to replicate millions of years of biological evolution using the simple, dead materials of the 19th century Earth. We reach deep into the quiet, unfeeling trees to harvest the wood we need to rebuild the broken, walking architecture of humanity. The act of walking with a heavy wooden prosthetic requires a complete, conscious overriding of natural biomechanical instinct. For a healthy person, the act of walking is entirely subconscious, a continuous, highly controlled forward fall managed perfectly by the brain stem. With a prosthetic leg, this effortless grace is violently shattered. The patient must consciously calculate every single movement. Because the wooden foot contains no nerve endings, it cannot send tactile feedback to the brain about the angle of the ground, the slipperiness of the mud, or the weight of the step. The soldier had to learn to forcefully thrust their hip forward to swing the dead weight of the willow wood, and then blindly trust that the mechanical joint would lock into place before they transferred their entire body weight onto it. They were operating a heavy, unfeeling machine strapped directly to their own raw nerves. To step forward into the unfamiliar dark on a leg that cannot feel the earth is a profound, daily act of mechanical faith. The deepest cuts inflicted by the surgeon were not upon the physical tissue, but upon the architecture of identity. In the era of the 1860s, the concept of masculine value and social worth was deeply tied to physical labor, agrarian endurance, and the mechanical integrity of the body. When a soldier returned to his family farm with an empty sleeve pinned neatly to his shoulder, or heavily leaning on a pair of wooden crutches, he was forced to navigate a profound psychological amputation. The world around him had not changed, but his fundamental ability to interact with it had been permanently altered. They had to mourn the death of their former selves, grieving for the capable, unbroken bodies they had left behind in the bloody mud of the surgical tents. This quiet, internal healing took decades longer than the closing of the skin. We are tasked with the heavy, lifelong burden of learning to gracefully carry the profound weight of our own emptiness. The physical closure of the surgical wound rarely marked the true end of the biological suffering. Even decades after the war ended, the survivors carried the deep, internal weather of their injuries with them. The heavy friction of the wooden prosthetic often rubbed the fragile skin of the stump raw, leading to chronic, weeping sores that refused to close. Microscopic bone spurs, created by the violent tearing of the capital saw, would continue to slowly grow and push outward against the tight scar tissue from the inside. The men learned to live with a baseline of chronic, vibrating pain that hummed quietly beneath every hour of their civilian lives. The surgical amputation was not a single event locked in the past. It was a permanent, living condition that echoed through the decades. The scars we bear are not silent, frozen monuments of history. They are living, breathing landscapes that continue to silently shape the weather of all our remaining days. The staggering scale of wartime suffering forced an unprecedented acceleration in the science of human biology. Before the 1860s, medical knowledge advanced at a slow, highly fractured pace, often isolated within the private practices of individual doctors. The sudden, catastrophic concentration of shattered bodies on the battlefield acted as a massive, brutal crucible for surgical innovation. Surgeons were forced to rapidly iterate and share their techniques, learning more about the complex hydraulic systems of the arteries and the intricate layers of the human anatomy in 4 years than they had in the previous century. The sheer volume of mechanical trauma transformed the isolated art of healing into a fiercely organized, systemic science. It was an era that violently ripped the veil off the internal mysteries of the flesh. We walk safely today on a high, modern bridge of medical knowledge that was built directly across a vast, dark ocean of profound historical suffering. The meticulous records kept by the military surgeons created the first massive, organized data set of human trauma. To make sense of the overwhelming biological chaos, the medical corps established a sprawling bureaucracy of flesh, requiring surgeons to meticulously document every amputation, every ligation, and every subsequent infection. These heavy, leather-bound ledgers were filled with beautiful, intricate anatomical drawings and highly detailed clinical observations, capturing the exact mechanics of how a human body fails and how it occasionally heals. After the war, these thousands of individual tragedies were compiled into the massive medical and surgical history, a foundational text that became a blueprint for modern trauma care. The doctors turned the raw, chaotic agony of the surgical tents into a structured, silent library of human endurance. It is a profound truth that the most valuable maps of the human interior were drawn entirely by men who were completely lost in the dark. The thousands of men suffering from phantom limbs forced the world of neurology to fundamentally rethink the brain. Prior to this era, the nervous system was largely viewed as a simple, static telegraph wire, passively transmitting signals from the body to the mind. But the endless reports of agonizing pain in legs that no longer existed proved that the human brain was not a passive receiver, but an active, deeply imaginative engine. Neurologists began to realize that the somatosensory cortex was a dynamic, highly plastic map that could fiercely hold onto the memory of a severed limb long after the physical tissue was buried. The injuries of the war birthed the modern understanding of neuroplasticity and the complex, subjective nature of human pain. The mind is a vast, quiet universe that refuses to easily let go of the stars it has lost, choosing instead to burn with the memory of their light. The true marvel of the surgical tents was never the heavy steel tools, but the staggering capacity of the organism to survive them. When we look back at the unwashed hands, the crude wooden tables, and the blunt teeth of the capital saw, the survival of any soldier seems like an absolute biological impossibility. Yet thousands upon thousands of men endured the shock of the blade, the microscopic onslaught of the bacteria, and the brutal extremes of the natural elements, and they simply continued to breathe. Their bodies engineered microscopic bypasses for severed arteries, built thick walls of scar tissue against aggressive infections, and slowly learned to walk on heavy pillars of dead wood. The history of this era is not a story of the frailty of the human body, but a testament to its terrifying, unyielding stubbornness. We are engineered with an architecture that is easy to break, but we are also deeply, miraculously engineered with a quiet imperative to simply continue. The quiet surrender. The heavy, mechanical work of the 19th-century surgeons is long finished. The vast canvas tents have rotted away into the soft earth. The deep trenches have been swallowed by thick green grass, and the heavy iron saws now rest silently behind the thick glass of museum cases. The roaring cannons and the chaotic, desperate cries of the field hospital have completely faded into the vast, indifferent silence of history. The men who lay on those crude wooden tables, fighting a desperate internal war for their own survival, have all found their ultimate, unbreakable peace. The biological struggles of the past no longer require your vigilance. Your own body is a masterpiece of this exact same resilient architecture, a quiet engine of survival that knows exactly how to maintain itself without any conscious effort from your mind. Right now, you do not need to fight to heal. You do not need to guard the perimeter of your flesh, and you do not need to brace yourself against the heavy blades of the world. The room around you is secure, the air is cool and still, and the shadows are soft. Listen to the steady, effortless rhythm of your own heart. It is the same rhythm that carried humanity through its darkest, most painful eras, quietly pumping life through the intricate rivers of your chest. Feel the slow, tidal pull of your lungs expanding and contracting, a mechanical grace that requires absolutely no thought, no worry, and no defense. Your autonomic nervous system is watching over the vast machinery of your cells, allowing your conscious mind to finally step away from the controls. Let the heavy muscles of your shoulders unspool. Let the tension in your jaw dissolve into the pillow. The wars of the day are over, and there is nothing left for you to solve, nothing left to protect, and nothing left to endure. You are safe, you are whole, and you are allowed to simply exist in the quiet dark. The most profound medicine we can ever give ourselves is the gentle, unresisting surrender to sleep. Drift now into that deep, dreamless quiet and let the long day finally end.